been to South Africa. It's an incredibly beautiful country, lots of biodiversity. We're just behind Brazil and Indonesia as the third highest number of species. And we've got 9 biomes, from incredible forests to deserts, amazing coastline. We've also got a lot of development challenges. Yeah, water security is one of them, and it's becoming an increasing challenge in South Africa. We've also got an extremely high unemployment rate. We've got a jobless rate of 25%. It's 4.4 million people, which is a huge segment of the population. And increasingly, we're seeing protests around service delivery, around unemployment, etc. So many of you have probably heard lots of stories about how well South Africa does in conserving its biodiversity, and certainly we have had great successes in mainstreaming biodiversity into various sectors. We have done well, but we've almost hit a glass ceiling in terms of scaling up or unlocking the potential for biodiversity into the development discourse. And this has been a subject that we've been grappling with for the last 5 years or so, is why have we only got so far? Why are we not really penetrating the mainstream economic discourse in the country? So we started a few years ago a project called Making the Case for Biodiversity. We were grappling with this very question, is, why does it seem that biodiversity really is not really taken into account in decision making, in planning, in policy processes? And the communications company that we got to help us think through this said that we're making a very obvious and fundamental mistake, and that is that we're not resonating as a sector with the concerns, the priorities of government, which are chiefly unemployment and service delivery. And furthermore, the way the biodiversity sector tends to communicate its stories is around crisis and doom and gloom. And that fundamentally is the wrong approach for communicating with economic sectors. They really don't want to hear more about crisis. They want to hear about solutions. So we looked then at testing a number of different communication approaches with national policymakers, municipal managers, engineers. And it's not a surprise that arguments along the lines of ecosystem services came through as having the strongest resonance with these policymakers. Ecosystem services itself as a term is actually not a very easy term, or it came back to us that was still way too scientific. We needed something that this particular audience, national policymakers, municipalities, could engage with. And so we started using the term ecological infrastructure, which is not a new term. We're applying it very specifically in South Africa to mean nature's equivalent of built infrastructure, providing a variety of services. And we suddenly found that we were getting a lot more traction with these audiences that we had been struggling to access for so many years. And particularly what resonated for our National Treasury was the fact that if you maintain your ecological infrastructure in a catchment, for example, in good condition, it will support the built infrastructure, the roads, the dams, the bridges, and this seems to have been a major key for our mainstreaming these opportunities into policy making. So just to take this dam, for example, the catchment looks pretty green. It's the middle of summer, but there is actually quite a high erosion rate in this catchment. And the main concern of the municipality and the water department is sedimentation. Sedimentation really is a very costly problem because it leads to less storage in the dam. Lost storage is a huge cost to society and to the country's fiscus. Also, because floods are not attenuated as well, there's been a lot of infrastructure damage in South Africa over the last 10 years, causing huge costs to replace bridges every 5 to 10 years. The cost of replacing the bridge is 10 times more expensive than the cost to restore the catchment and reduce the damage causing floods. And these were the sorts of arguments that weren't necessarily heavily laden with financial figures, but just good common sense that the Treasury really started to get very interested in. So in terms of taking forward this ecological infrastructure approach, we went on two different tracks. Firstly, we needed to get policymakers, ministers, municipal engineers talking about it, seeing how they understood it, seeing how they saw application for it in their settings. And so you may remember our finance minister, previous finance minister, Trevor Manuel. We brought him to dialogues to talk about what does ecological infrastructure mean in his words. And that was a really effective way of getting other municipal managers, policymakers to start thinking about environment and biodiversity in a very different way. Not a bunch of people coming with problems, but actually coming with solutions. The bottom picture there, the man in the background wrote our National Development Plan, and we found great traction getting ecosystem services, ecological infrastructure taken up into our National Development Plan. And I've just put there the front cover of a magazine, Engineering News. It's a huge publication in South Africa, read by business and the engineering fraternity. And we managed to get about 4 or 5 really great articles into this publication, including 2 front cover issues. So it just gives you a sense that we're reaching a different audience in a different way to what we had previously. The other track that we went on was to develop a really big landscape level pilot that would be a much bigger scale proof of concept than we'd ever done before around ecosystem services. And we really didn't want this to be another biodiversity supply driven landscape initiative. We wanted to find a municipality that would actually drive this from an engineering perspective. So we spoke with the head of Durban's Water and Sanitation Department. We spent about a year talking to him to explain how beyond engineering, there's another aspect to the water balance for Durban. Durban's where the last World Parks Congress was held 11 years ago. And any of you that were there then, they didn't have such a serious water problem. But now, 11 years later, the demand for water way exceeds the supply. And it's our 3rd biggest economy. It's a huge growing city. So this really is a massive concern. And usually engineers will look to more fancy engineering solutions to deal with these problems. But the head of water and sanitation realized that actually they're not going to be able to engineer their way out of this problem. And essentially what we have catalyzed under the championship of the head of water and sanitation is a landscape scale project in the catchment for Durban. It's called the Umgeni catchment. It's a huge catchment and it's fraught with all sorts of problems: overgrazing, erosion, a lot of industrial activity, a lot of point source pollution from intensive agriculture. And last year we launched a partnership of 36 different players, those causing some of the problems in the catchments, those that are regulating some of the activities in the catchment. NGOs, government at all levels came together around a vision to try to restore the ecological infrastructure in this catchment to improve the water delivery for the city of Durban. And we're hoping that in 5 to 10 years' time, there will be a real inspiration for other cities and smaller municipalities in South Africa to follow suit. It won't be the biodiversity sector that will be selling this. It will be those engineers in the department that will be talking about it. And we believe that's one of the keys to scaling up and to sustainability of this intervention. So I mentioned earlier that we have huge unemployment in South Africa, and one thing that you can't mechanize is ecosystem restoration. And at the moment, through our Working for Water and associated programs, we employ 11,000 people per year, or full-time equivalents per year. Research that's been done has looked at the potential job creation within ecosystem restoration. It's 400,000 people that have the potential to be employed in this sector. Now that's 10% of our employment gap in South Africa. It really is hugely significant, and the benefits that flow from ecosystem restoration are multiple, not just water, disaster risk reduction, all sorts of things. So what we've seen in terms of uptake initially into the policy space, South Africa's just revised its water resource policy, and we're very encouraged to see that ecological infrastructure has made its way into this policy quite explicitly, mentioning that ecological infrastructure, strategic national assets, which really need to be acknowledged, and we need to really up investment in the maintenance and restoration of ecological infrastructure. Very encouraging, we've got a South African national infrastructure plan. A lot of countries in Africa and beyond are developing these plans, and the timing was just right to be able to influence the design of some of the infrastructure plans. What has actually happened over and above integrating ecological infrastructure into 4 or 5 of the strategic integrated projects in South Africa is our minister has negotiated for a strategic infrastructure project that just focuses on water security and ecological infrastructure. And through this, we're really hoping to take to scale to unlock the potential of ecological infrastructure for our national development agenda. So in summary, I think that one of the paths that we're finding successful is to work through municipal managers, policymakers, to try to seed with them and get them to drive the demand for nature solutions. And we see this as a sustainable way to scale up the interventions that to date we've had at site level. Thank you very much.